Hello Path of Exile players. I've been encouraged to make a video sharing my build, as this might be my favorite build I've ever played in Path of Exile. I'm not a content creator for Path of Exile, so this video will be very raw, but I am a guide consumer, as well as I've played since the beta. I am the type of player that has always wanted to make their own build, but the builds are never strong enough to tackle the hardest level of content in the game, and I always fall off once I reach red maps. Apparently until now. This build was inspired by Mathel, so shout out to Mathel. I was watching his stream and he was coming up with another new build, which is basically every day for him. He was theory crafting an explosive concoction build that was going to focus on critical hits, which any PoE player knows that critical hit builds can be very expensive. With the introduction of the Keystone Precise technique, I wondered how a non-crit version would turn out, since this likely would be cheaper. So off to POB I went, knowing I'd just be POBing another one of my thousands of custom builds that wouldn't pan out. I've always been a player that was never able to generate enough currency to purchase huge ticket items like Headhunter, Mage Blood, the Squire, etc. So of course a new build would need to have very low entry point, but also not fall off in red maps like my builds always do, since that would just make me reroll again before I had the time to build up my currency to make the build strong enough to push through that wall. A lot of times, unique items aren't very expensive, so I decided to put a lot of unique items in the POB at first to see what sort of numbers I could get. Surprisingly enough, with realistic settings selected for DPS, the build seemed to be very cheap. So of course my initial thoughts were, these numbers have to be incorrect, but I will level the character, equip the gear, and see how it feels anyway, because I can't help myself but make new characters and have them fail. This one did not. So let's get to the build as it is now, and if there is any interest in what the initial gear was, I can make another video showcasing the gear that it started with. I will go over the gear in what I believe is the order of importance. First, we have the chest piece. Skin of the Lords with iron reflexes. I'm not even 100% sure this 6th link setup is completely optimized, as the 6th link may be able to be replaced based on the colors available for the Skin of the Lords. The build's damage was great with just the Skin of the Loyal with +1 gem corruption, but the tankiness went through the roof once I equipped this chest with iron reflexes. Linked in the chest is Explosive Concoction, Greater Volley, Elemental Penetration, Elemental Damage with Attacks, Empower, and Cruelty. The current amulet is an Ashes of the Stars amulet. I believe that this amulet is what helps the build function as well as it does against bosses. The plus quality of all skill gems adds to Explosive Concoction's quality, which is area of effect, and that helps all of the projectiles overlap on the bosses easier. The +1 level of skill gems just scales Explosive Concoction, of course, and the reservation efficiency helps free up mana for attacks. I currently have Marked for Death anointed, but I am not 100% certain that this is the best anoint. It just feels awesome on bosses. Bannerman seems to be a great anoint for damage as well. The current rings are a set of the Taming. These rings helped us with resistances. Originally the build had all unique items, except gloves and a shield, so I had to get resistances somewhere. The damage from these rings also feels irreplaceable. And the current helmet is a Crown of the Inward Eye. I think this helmet is why the build has enough life to get by. 19%, 20% if divined up to the maximum. Helps make up for the 2 rings, amulet, chest, and gloves not having life. There may be a better helmet for damage, but I don't think there is one for survivability. Explosive Concoction area of effect enchant is also 100% the best enchant, and finding it on this helmet is a bit easier since people love to run lab and enchant Crown of the Inward Eye. The links in the helmet currently are Cast and Damage Taken level 6, Vol Molten Shell level 13, even though I don't ever seem to hit Vol Molten Shell, and Increased Duration level 20, Unlinked is a war banner, as I don't want the reservation cost to be increased by linking it to increased duration. The adrenaline buff from placing war banner is mostly saved for bosses and other big monsters where DPS increase is necessary. Current boots are Legacy of the Fury. I love these boots. I originally included them in case I needed help with clear. After putting the build together, the Scorch from these apparently is way better than I expected. Scorch reduces all 3 elemental resists on enemies, and since we do all 3 elements of damage, it helps all 3. I think they might be able to be replaced, but I just love these suckers. The links are Shield Charge, Faster Attacks, Ancestral Protector, preferably Phantasmal, and Combustion. You basically put down the totem for every boss and big monster for the attack speed buff, and when it hits, it applies Combustion, which is nice to reduce the enemy's fire res even further, since fire damage is our majority of damage. The current gloves are the first rare item in the build. I essence crafted these, so they probably could be better, but only very slightly. They have life, attack speed, and accuracy. Having accuracy on the gloves helps keep the accuracy higher than life so that you trigger precise technique. And I crafted attack and cast speed while focused. And the attack and cast speed while focused mod feels absolutely broken. I also Eldritch crafted on the fire exposure, since again that's our biggest source of damage. And the shock spread seems nice. The links are Determination, Grace, Enlighten, and Precision. Enlighten really isn't needed. I had one from a previous build, so I figured I would use it. As long as you're hitting at least one target with Explosive Concoction, Mana Leech from the tree is typically enough to allow you to not run out of mana, so the freed up mana that Enlighten provides isn't really all that necessary. The current belt is another rare item. This started as a Prism Weave belt actually for damage, but I wanted to upgrade so I could get more strength and life, and Prism Weave felt like the best unique to replace. It's a fairly basic unique item. I just got as much strength as I could, which helped me level up the Ancestral Protector even further and the Molten Shell. And then I got life on it, elemental damage with attacks, and any resistances were icing on the cake. The current shield is another rare item. Another place I felt like I needed it to be rare so that I could get enough life. And the resistances and spell suppress helped shore up those weaknesses, as well as I crafted on intelligence to be able to take an intelligence node out of the tree to get a passive back. Annoyingly, I needed at least 111 intelligence for elemental penetration support in the main links, so that is why I needed as much intelligence. The links are Mark on Hit, Sniper's Mark, and Vol Haste. We actually don't even use the Haste aura. We just use Vol Haste on bosses. You pretty much just typically would use it whenever you're going to place your totem, whenever you're going to place your war banner for adrenaline, and whenever you're going to focus for the attack speed buff from the gloves. So basically just bosses and really big beefy monsters. The current flasks, the first one is an instant life flask with bleed immunity, very basic. I was using this prior to getting a corrupted blood jewel, but it still feels nice to have the bleed removal since we're still somewhat weak to standard bleed. I have a Quicksilver flask with gain X charges when you're hit by an enemy and movement speed. Super generic, super basic. I also just recently added a Starlight Chalice coupled with the mastery point on the tree that increases the minimum exposure. This provides a pretty large triple exposure to the enemies around you. I have the used when you hit a rare or unique enemy because I kept forgetting to use it on bosses. The fourth and fifth flasks are a Sapphire and a Topaz flask to increase Explosive Concoction damage. Since Explosive Concoction uses charges from these flasks to add damage, We do not touch them. We never use them. I used an enkindling orb on them to get as much charges as possible. As you can see, they have 103 and 110 total charges on each. Explosive Concoction uses 3 charges per attack. So with a minimum of 100 charges, we can get off 33 attacks before we run out of charges to pull from. I also crafted on charge recovery on both, so that coupled with the flask mastery on the tree that recovers 1 utility flask every 3 seconds, we get an extra flask charge every other tick. So every 3 seconds we will get back 1 charge, and then the next 3 seconds we get back 2 charges, and then 1, and then 2, and so on. I currently only have 1 jewel on the passive tree, which I only just added at level 93, to get corrupted blood immunity. I got fire and lightning res on the jewel as well, so that I could make sure I was resist capped for elemental weakness maps. For the passive tree, first things first, the passive tree is probably inefficient, but everything seems pretty important. Charisma and the grace mastery is why we're able to run all 4 auras. The precision mastery just seems to help free up mana. I'd love to take more life nodes, but I can't really have more life than accuracy or precise technique will not really trigger. The flask mastery helps us sustain utility flask charges. The elemental mastery here helps the starlight chalice exposure be bigger that I was talking about earlier. Clever thief and the life and mana on hit small node is the only reason we can really sustain mana to keep attacking. The spell suppress wheels help get to 100%, and anyone that's played with high spell suppress numbers knows that it feels very cozy. The elemental mastery down here helps with all res to keep us high enough to be able to map successfully. Precise technique, once again, is what the build is basically built around. Weathered Hunter here feels a little out of the way, but it helps keep our accuracy higher to keep precise technique active. The more accuracy you have, the more life that we're allowed to have, effectively. Point Blank is actually a new addition. It seems to help remove the dead zone area of damage increased by Deadeye's Far Shot. With Far Shot, you deal less damage until about 35 units of range. Point Blank helps counter that by increasing damage in the dead zone of being close to you. For Ascendancy nodes, Far Shot is taken. It's a nice damage boost, but mostly we take this so that we can take Endless Munitions that's behind it for 2 additional projectiles. Currently, each projectile with all buffs up is about 1 million DPS, so Endless Munitions is basically 2 million DPS. Focal Point is taken for more boss DPS, and coupled with Mark on Hit Sniper's Mark, our Sniper's Mark adds about 3.5 million DPS. Focal Point is absolutely busted. The last point is Gathering Winds. None of our other points is good for us, and Tailwind is never bad. Here's a snapshot of our stats. Of note, Explosive Concoction has 5205 accuracy, which is higher than our 4724 life, so that keeps Precise Technique active. Precise Technique accounts for roughly 2 million DPS. In maps where we have less accuracy as one of the mods, it is annoying, but it's doable. And you can see that armor is 48,000 flat with no flasks, no bonuses, so basically we're sitting at 90% estimated physical damage reduction as well. I'm sure I've left out plenty. I don't expect anyone to copy the build, as I've never showcased a build before, but if you happen to try it, please let me know your results compared to other things you've played. This build is a ton of fun, and again, if folks are interested, I can share the exact entry-level setup that I started with at level 75 when I was doing T16s. I currently am doing very, very juiced T16s with absolutely no issues. every once in a while, Harbinger with proximity shields will be a little difficult, and I die every once in a while. But as you can see, I'm level 93, and doing T16s no issues, doing the Eater of Worlds and Searing Exarch bosses no problem, and it just seems like such a strong build that if anyone is any better than me at making any builds and improving them, they could probably push this to the moon. I appreciate you watching this build showcase video that I've made. If I continue to make build showcase videos or any update videos to this build in the future, they will be posted here on the channel, so please follow so that you can see those in the future.
Hello.